Rain hammered the floor-to-ceiling windows of Blackwood Manor like it had a grudge against the glass. Damien Blackwood pressed his pen against the bottom of the divorce papers, and the scratch of ink across that final signature line was the loudest sound in the room. 7 years of marriage. Ended in 4 seconds. He didn't look at her when he slid the papers across the mahogany desk. Didn't trust himself to. Because if he looked at Evelyn's face right now, that quiet, unreadable face he had spent 7 years trying to decode, he might hesitate. And Damien Blackwood did not hesitate. He had built an empire on that single principle. "It's done," he said. Evelyn picked up the papers. She read them the way she read everything, slowly, carefully, like every word deserved consideration before it was accepted. Her hair was down, damp at the ends from the storm outside. She was wearing a gray sweater he'd bought her 3 years ago in Milan. She hadn't dressed up, hadn't prepared for this like it was an event. That bothered him more than he expected. "You're not going to say anything?" he asked. She set the papers back down, stood, walked to the closet near the door where a single suitcase waited, already packed. He noticed that too. She had known, had prepared, had made her choice before he even opened his mouth tonight, which meant she'd been carrying the weight of this ending longer than he had, and somehow that made him feel like the one who'd been left behind. "Evelyn," she stopped, didn't turn. "I'm doing this because I know why you're doing it." Her voice was steady, not cold, just steady, the way a surgeon's hands are steady. "You think I'm a liability. You're not equipped for this world. I've watched you flinch at things that would make grown men walk out of a room. I've spent 3 years making sure no one touches you, and every day I spend protecting you is a day my enemies see weakness in me. I can't—" He stopped, pressed his knuckles against the desk. "I can't afford to love something they can take from me." Evelyn was quiet for a long moment. Then she picked up her suitcase, walked to the door, reached for the handle. "One day," she said, and her voice didn't crack, didn't waver, didn't give him a single thing to hold on to, "you'll understand why silence was the only way I could protect you." She opened the door. Rain rushed in. She stepped out into it without an umbrella, without looking back, without a single dramatic gesture that would have made this easier for him to dismiss. The door clicked shut. Damien stood in the silence she left behind and tried to feel like a man who had made the right decision. He was still trying 4 hours later when his head of security, Rand, walked into the study with an expression Damien had only seen on the man twice before. Once when a rival boss put a car bomb under Damien's vehicle, and once when their primary money laundering operation got hit by a federal task force on a Wednesday morning. "Boss," Rand's voice was careful, "you need to come to the front gate." "What is it?" I don't have a way to explain it. You need to see it." Damien followed him through the east corridor, down the main staircase, through the double front doors, and stopped at the top of the stone steps leading to the circular drive. 20 black Rolls-Royces sat in the rain. Identical. Perfectly spaced. Engines off, headlights on, running in synchronized silence like something from a dream or a threat. Damien counted them instinctively. Trained habit. And when he reached 20, he stopped counting because his brain refused to process the implication. Each vehicle had a driver. Each driver stood outside in the downpour, door open, face forward, completely still. Around those vehicles stood men, dozens of them. Then more. Then more than Damien's eyes could organize into a reliable number. 200, maybe more, in tailored black suits, water streaming off their shoulders. None of them reaching for a weapon, none of them scanning the perimeter the way armed men do when they're expecting a fight. They weren't here for a fight. They were waiting. And none of them, not one single man in that entire formation, was looking at Damien. The lead driver walked forward. He stopped at the base of the stone steps. He was 60, maybe older, silver-haired, with a bearing that made Damien think of generals and heads of state. He reached into his breast pocket and withdrew a small black envelope, which he held forward without approaching further. One of Damien's men moved to intercept it. The silver-haired man looked at him the way you look at a child who has wandered into a conversation they don't understand. Rand stepped forward instead, took the envelope, brought it to Damien. Inside was a single card, cream-colored, embossed in silver. No letterhead, no organization name, just 6 words in a clean, unfamiliar typeface. She is ready to come home. Damien was still holding the card when the rear door of the lead vehicle opened. Evelyn stepped out. She had changed. The gray sweater was gone. She wore something dark and structured, and her hair was pinned back, and she moved differently, not like a woman who had just been divorced, not like a woman who had just walked through a rainstorm. She moved like a woman who had been waiting a very long time to stop pretending. The silver-haired man turned to her and bent into a deep, formal bow. "Welcome home," he said, and his voice carried the weight of a man who had waited years to say those words. "Madam Chairwoman." The 200 men lowered their heads as one. Behind Damien, he heard the sound of his own soldiers shifting their positions, not toward the threat, but away from it, instinctively. The way prey responds to a predator it didn't know was in the room. Damien's hand tightened around the cream card until the edge cut into his palm. He looked at Evelyn. She didn't look at him with triumph, didn't look at him with anger, looked at him the way you look at someone you have already grieved. "I'm sorry," she said quietly, "for the parts I couldn't explain." Then she turned, let the silver-haired man guide her to the rear passenger door, and got in. The convoy pulled away in perfect formation. No noise, no aggression, no signal beyond its own undeniable weight. Damien stood in the rain and watched 20 black Rolls-Royces carry his ex-wife into a world he had never known existed, and understood, with a clarity that arrived exactly 7 years too late, that he had just made the worst mistake of his life. He went back inside, poured 2 fingers of bourbon, didn't drink it. Rand appeared in the doorway 15 minutes later with a tablet in his hand and the expression of a man delivering news he genuinely wished he didn't have. "I ran the plates," Rand said, "on the vehicles." "And? They don't exist. Not in any government registry anywhere. No insurance records, no VIN matches, no registration history. It's like they were never manufactured." He paused. "But I found something else. While I was looking." He held out the tablet. "I started pulling threads on Evelyn's background. The way you asked me to do when you first started seeing her 7 years ago. I remember. You came back clean." "I came back blocked," Rand said carefully. "I thought that was the same thing. I was wrong." He waited for Damien to take the tablet. "The Ashford Consortium." Damien read the name. It meant nothing. "I've never heard of it." "Neither had I. Neither had almost anyone." Rand's voice dropped lower, not from fear, but from a kind of stunned reverence. That's the point. What Rand had found, buried under 9 levels of corporate misdirection, 3 shell companies registered in jurisdictions that most world maps didn't include, and a financial history so deliberately obscured it looked like no history at all, was this. The Ashford Consortium was not a crime organization. It was something older and more patient than that. It operated across intelligence communities on 4 continents. It maintained private security apparatus that several sovereign nations quietly contracted when their own resources couldn't be trusted. It held financial instruments so complex they generated their own regulatory frameworks. It had access to information, not stolen information, not hacked information, but properly, legally, terrifyingly acquired information on virtually every government official, criminal organization, and multinational corporation operating in the hemisphere. And 7 years ago, its sole heir had walked away from all of it, had married a Mafia boss who didn't even know her real name, had spent 7 years living in a house with him, sleeping beside him, making coffee in his kitchen, attending his dinners, enduring his silences, and had never once, not in 7 years, suggested she was anything other than what she appeared to be. Damien set the tablet down, picked up the bourbon, set it down again. "There's more," Rand said. He looked like he wanted to sit down but hadn't been offered a chair and didn't know how to ask for one. "I started cross-referencing our incident history, major events, things that should have gone badly and didn't." Damien said nothing. Let him continue. "The Ortega hit 3 years ago. You remember how the shooter missed at point-blank range? Equipment malfunction. We never confirmed that. I went back through it tonight. The gun had been tampered with, subtly, professionally. No prints, no trace. But someone had gotten to the shooter's weapon before the meeting." Damien felt something cold move through his chest. "The Senator Howell situation," Rand continued. "The federal investigation that disappeared in 2021. I always assumed we paid someone. But there's no payment record, no bribe, no favor called in, nothing. It just stopped. Someone buried it, and it wasn't us. Rand. The Vega brothers. When they moved against your northern operation, they pulled back overnight. We never knew why. I thought they got a better offer somewhere else. He stopped. His jaw was tight. It wasn't a better offer. Someone had delivered compromising information about Marcus Vega's financial accounts to his own family. It destroyed him internally before he could ever touch you. Damien stood very still. Every major threat, Rand said quietly. Every crisis that resolved itself. Every assassination attempt that failed. Every investigation that went cold. Every rival who backed off without explanation. He paused. 7 years of it, boss. 7 years of someone standing between you and the things that should have killed you. The room was very quiet. Rain against glass. Bourbon untouched. She never said a word, Damien said. It wasn't a question. It wasn't an accusation. It was just a fact he was arranging in the space between himself and everything he thought he knew. There's one more thing. Rand's voice had changed. Something about it was careful in a way that hadn't been there before. Careful the way you are with something fragile. I don't know how to say this, so I'm just going to say it. He reached into his jacket, produced a photograph printed on regular paper like it had come off a home printer. He held it out. Damien took it. It was old. Grainy the way photographs get when they've been scanned from a damaged original. It showed a narrow alley, the kind you find in port cities, the kind nobody photographs on purpose. There were 2 figures in it. One was a teenage boy, maybe 15, thin, street-worn, crouched beside a rusted delivery truck with the rear door open. He was reaching toward someone inside the truck, pulling them out, and his whole body had the posture of someone moving fast, because fast was the only way to survive what was happening. The second figure was a girl, younger, maybe 12 or 13. Her face was turned toward the boys, and even in the grainy resolution, even after whatever the years had done to this photograph, the expression on her face was unmistakable. It was terror giving way to trust. It was someone realizing, in the worst moment of their life, that they were not alone. Damien stared at the photograph for a very long time. The boy was him. He knew it in his bones before his mind caught up. The lean of the shoulders, the way he held his weight on the balls of his feet, the coat that had been his only coat for 3 winters straight. He had been 15, running from people who wanted him dead for knowing things he hadn't even understood yet. And in that alley, behind that truck, he had found a girl hiding in the back, terrified, silent, alone, and he had done the only thing that felt human in an inhuman night. He had gotten her out, pointed her toward a safe street, disappeared before morning because staying anywhere too long was how you died. He had never known what happened to her, had barely thought about it in the 30 years since. His hand was shaking. He wasn't a man whose hands shook. He put the photograph down before Rand could see it. "Where did you get this?" "Her estate." Rand's voice was gentle in a way the man had never been gentle in the 11 years Damien had known him. It was in her personal files, not locked, not hidden, just there, like she kept it somewhere she could find it. Damien walked to the window. Rain, dark city, 20 empty spaces in his circular drive where 20 black Rolls-Royces had sat an hour ago. She had recognized him. The first time they met, at that charity event in the Meridian Hotel, where his people had arranged his attendance for political cover, she had recognized him, had known immediately, had known and had said nothing, had agreed to dinner, had answered his questions with the patience of someone who already knew how the story ended and was willing to wait for him to catch up. She had married him not to access his power, not to leverage his organization, not for any reason that fit inside the architecture of the world he had always lived in. She had married the boy who pulled her out of a truck in an alley when she was 12 years old and the world was trying to swallow her whole. A knock at the study door, sharp. 3 times. Not Rand's knock. Damien turned. Marcus Hale stood in the doorway, his senior advisor, 15 years in that role. A man Damien had trusted with more of his business than almost anyone alive. Marcus looked at Damien with an expression that was almost relief. "I heard about the divorce," Marcus said. "I know tonight has been a lot. But I want you to know, Damien, you made the right call. She was never right for this world. I've been telling you that for years." Damien looked at him, really looked at him, thought about 7 years of subtle suggestions, 7 years of comments framed as concern, as loyalty, as the hard truth only a real friend would tell you. She's too soft for this life. She makes you distracted. They see you looking at her the way you look at her, and they think you're weak. 7 years of a slow, patient, professional erosion. Who told you? Damien asked. Word travels fast when... The papers were signed 4 hours ago. You're not on any list I called tonight. Who told you? Marcus stopped. Damien crossed the room slowly. I'm going to ask you something, he said. And I need you to understand that the answer you give me in the next 30 seconds will determine everything that happens to you after that. Marcus's face had gone very still. How long? Damien said. Have you known what Evelyn really is? The silence between them stretched out like something tearing. And in that silence, in the micro-expression that moved across Marcus Hale's face before the man could arrange it into something more controlled, Damien got his answer. Not hours, not weeks, years. He had known for years. Damien took a breath, set his hands flat on the table between them, looked at the man he had trusted with his life and his business and 15 years of loyalty. Get out of my house, he said. His voice was quiet. And pray I'm too busy in the next 72 hours to think about you. Marcus left. Damien sat alone in the study until the bourbon warmed to room temperature and the rain finally, reluctantly, began to slow. Somewhere in this city, or above it, or beyond it, in a world that operated on rules he had never known existed, Evelyn Ashford was going home. And for the first time in 30 years, Damien Blackwood did not know what to do next. He picked up his phone, set it down, picked it up again. He had no number for her. He realized, with a shock that moved through him like cold water, that in 7 years of marriage he had never once called a number that actually reached her. She had always been present, always there, always findable within the walls of a life he'd built around himself. He had never needed to call her. He sat with that for a long time. Outside, the last of the rain moved off to the east. The city underneath his window settled into the particular silence that only comes after a storm. Not peaceful, exactly, but exhausted. Wrung out. Like something that had been holding tension for hours finally let it go. Damien found, to his considerable surprise, that he felt something similar. Not peace, not resolution, but the strange, uncomfortable clarity that comes after the moment you realize the story you've been telling yourself is wrong. Not slightly wrong, not wrong in small correctable ways, but wrong all the way down. Wrong in its foundation, wrong in its premises, wrong in the things it never bothered to question because they were so embedded they didn't look like choices. He had believed love was a liability, had believed that the woman beside him was fragile, had believed that protection meant building walls and that strength meant needing nothing, had believed, at the center of all of it, that the world he'd built was something he'd built alone. He stood, walked to his desk, opened the bottom drawer and found, beneath 3 years of documents he'd been meaning to file, the guest book from their wedding reception. Small, cream-colored. Evelyn had bought it from a shop in Florence on their honeymoon and brought it home to use as a keepsake. He had signed it at some point, hadn't looked at it since. He opened it now. On the first page, in her handwriting, careful, unhurried, the handwriting of a woman who said exactly what she meant and no more, was a single line she had written the night of their wedding. You saved me once without knowing my name. I intend to return the favor. He closed the book, held it, sat in the dark with the weight of 30 years arriving all at once, and understood, in the most complete and ruinous way a person can understand something, that the woman he had divorced tonight had loved him longer than he had known she existed. And somewhere in the machinery of the night ahead, in the reverberations of 20 black cars and 1 cream card and a photograph from an alley he'd forgotten, something was beginning. I didn't know its shape yet. He didn't know its cost. But for the first time in 15 years, Damien Blackwood was afraid. Not of his enemies, not of his rivals, not of the forces gathering in the dark outside his walls. He was afraid he had already lost the only thing that had ever mattered. And that fear, sharp and specific and completely unfamiliar, was the first true thing he had felt in a very long time. Damien didn't sleep. He sat in the study until 4 in the morning with the wedding guest book in his lap and the untouched bourbon sweating a ring into the mahogany desk. And he did what he had not done since he was 15 years old, hiding in the back of a freight truck with nothing but bad options and a knife he didn't know how to use properly. He thought. Not the calculating, tactical thinking that ran his organization, not the cold geometry of threat assessment and resource allocation. He thought the way a person thinks when the floor has dropped out from under everything they believed and all the careful architecture they built over 30 years is standing on nothing. At 4:30, Rand knocked. Damien said, "Come in." Rand entered holding a tablet and wearing the expression of a man who had also not slept and who had spent those sleepless hours learning things he would have preferred not to know. "How bad?" Damien asked. "Define bad." Rand sat down across from him without being invited. That alone told Damien something. In 11 years, the man had sat down in his presence exactly twice, both times when the news was so significant that standing felt inappropriate for the weight of it. "The Garza family hit our eastern distribution points at 2 a.m., Rand said. 3 locations, simultaneous. They've been watching the operation for weeks, waiting for a window. Tonight they decided the window opened. Casualties? 4 men down. Not dead, but they're not going back to work this month either. We lost the warehouse on Crescent and the 2 satellite points on the north side. Garza's people moved fast, professionally." He paused. "Too professionally for Garza. Those are borrowed tactics. Someone helped them plan it. Someone told them tonight was the night to move." Rand's jaw tightened. "Word travels, boss. The divorce paperwork cleared through the city recorder's office at midnight. Digital record. Someone in our world was watching for that filing." Damien absorbed this without visible reaction, which was its own kind of reaction. The stillness of a man working very hard to process too many things at once. "The Velasco brothers called at 3 a.m., Rand continued, nominally to express condolences about the divorce, realistically to ask whether the Blackwood organization was currently in a position to honor its existing agreements, or whether they should make other arrangements. He said the last 3 words with the specific inflection you use when a threat is dressed up as a business question. "What did you tell them?" "I told them Mr. Blackwood would return their call personally." "Good." Damien set the guest book on the desk, smoothed the cover with his palm once, then stood. "And the corridor agreement? The port access?" "Fernandez hasn't called, but his people have been moving cargo through alternate routes since midnight. He's already hedging." So that was how it worked. 7 years of marriages and careful alliances and the particular reputation that came from never losing. And all it took was one night, one signature on one set of papers. And the structure began separating at the joints. Not because Damien was weaker, but because the thing that had been holding it together wasn't his power at all. It was hers. And she had walked out the door with it. "I want Marcus brought in," Damien said. Rand looked at him. "Not to the house, somewhere neutral. And don't tell him why." Damien moved to the window. The city was gray in the pre-dawn, rain-cleaned and indifferent. He knew about the Ashford Consortium. He's been in my organization for 15 years. That means he either found out on his own and said nothing, which is a betrayal, or someone told him and paid him to say nothing, which is a different kind of betrayal. Either way, I need to know which. "And if he doesn't want to talk?" "He'll want to talk." Damien turned from the window. He's a man who spent 15 years telling other people's secrets. They always want to talk eventually. It's the only power they have left. Rand nodded. "Left." Damien showered, changed, ate half a piece of toast standing over the kitchen sink because his body needed fuel, whether or not he had any appetite for it. He had learned that lesson young. Eat when you can, sleep when you can, because neither will be available when you most need them. His phone rang at 6:40 a.m. Unknown number. He almost let it go to voicemail. He answered it. The voice on the other end was female, young, professional in the way that military-trained people are professional, efficient, no wasted syllables. "Mr. Blackwood, my name is not important. I work for the Ashford Consortium's security division. I'm calling because you are currently in danger from 3 separate coordinated actions that will escalate significantly in the next 18 hours, and Madam Chairwoman has authorized this contact." Damien's hand tightened on the phone. "She authorized it," he said carefully, "or she ordered it." A brief pause. Enough to confirm he'd read it correctly. "She asked us to make you aware," the voice said. "She is not in the habit of ordering things done for people who didn't ask for her help." "What are the 3 actions?" "The Garza movement you already know about. The second is financial. Someone has filed documentation with 3 regulatory bodies simultaneously alleging money laundering through your legitimate real estate holdings. The filing was prepared months ago. It was waiting for a trigger. Another pause. The divorce was the trigger. The third action is personal. There is a team of 4 men currently surveilling your property. They arrived at 5:15 a.m. They are not Garza's people. Whose? Silence. Tell me whose, he said. That's what Madam Chairwoman is currently working to confirm. The voice softened by approximately 1 degree. Not warm, but human. Mr. Blackwood, she wanted you to know that the offer she made you 3 weeks ago still stands. He went very still. She made me no offer 3 weeks ago. Another pause, longer this time. I apologize, the woman said. I was given to understand that she had spoken with you directly. She was recalibrating. He could hear it. She prepared documentation, a full briefing on the threats to your organization and what we believed was driving them. She had intended to bring it to you herself. She never brought me anything. The silence between them carried significant weight. I see, the woman said finally. Thank you, Mr. Blackwood. I'll need to relay this to Madam Chairwoman. The professionalism had returned, but there was something underneath it now, something that sounded like anger being very carefully contained. Please be aware of the surveillance team. We recommend you don't leave the property alone until we have more information. The call ended. Damien stood in his kitchen with the phone in his hand and thought about what 3 weeks ago had looked like. 3 weeks ago, Evelyn had asked him twice in 4 days for time alone with him. Not for dinner, not for a social engagement, for a private conversation, just the 2 of them, no staff, no advisors. He had rescheduled the first time because of a conflict with the Velasco call. He had canceled the second time because Marcus had pulled him into an emergency meeting about the northern operation that turned out, upon review, to have been not remotely an emergency. She had tried to warn him. And Marcus had made sure he wasn't available to hear it. Damien put the phone in his pocket and stood very quietly in his clean, expensive kitchen and felt, moving through him with specific and focused intensity, something he hadn't felt in years. Rage. Not the cold operational anger that drove decisions, the other kind. The hot, disorienting kind that lives in the chest and makes the hands want to do things the brain is still voting on. He controlled it. He was good at controlling it. But he let himself feel it for a full 60 seconds before he put it somewhere it could be useful later. Then he called Rand. The surveillance team outside, 4 men, 5:15 arrival. Tell me you already found them. A beat. We found them at 5:45, Rand said. I didn't want to wake you until I knew more. Do you know more? Enough. His voice was careful. They're not wearing syndicate colors, but the vehicle registration traces back to a shell company that traces back to another shell company that traces back to boss. It goes somewhere I didn't expect. Tell me. It traces back to a holdings company called Halloran Acquisitions, which is a legitimate real estate investment firm, which is owned 60% by a man named Sebastian Crow. The name landed like a stone dropped into still water. Sebastian Crow. Damien's adoptive father. The man who had found him at 16, half-starved and running from people who wanted him dead, and had done what no one else in his life had done. Had chosen him. Had taught him the business. Had given him language for the world he was already living in. Had turned a feral, desperate kid into something that looked like a leader. Damien had not spoken to Sebastian in 3 years. The old man had retired, or claimed to have retired, to an estate on the coast. Had handed the Blackwood organization to Damien at 62 with what appeared to be genuine satisfaction and walked away from it without looking back. Damien had believed that. Had believed it because he had wanted to, because the alternative was a story about trust and love and chosen family that he did not have the structural capacity to re-examine while also running an empire. Pull everything you can find on Halloran Acquisitions, Damien said, and don't call anyone. Don't tell anyone what we're looking at. Not until I tell you to. He ended the call. Sat down at the kitchen table. The toast had gone cold. He ate the rest of it anyway. Marcus arrived at the neutral location, a warehouse on the South Industrial Corridor that Damien's people used for sensitive conversations, at 9:15 a.m. He came alone, which meant he either had nothing to hide or had already decided on his story. Damien was already there when he walked in. Sitting on a folding chair in the middle of a large empty space, Jacket on, hands in his lap, no visible weapons. Marcus looked around the space, registered its emptiness, registered that there were no other people visible, though he was experienced enough to know that didn't mean no one was there. He stopped 10 feet away. Damien. His voice was measured. You wanted to talk. I wanted to ask you something. Then ask. How long have you been reporting to Sebastian Crow? The silence that followed was complete, the kind that happens when a specific question lands precisely on a specific nerve. Marcus didn't move, didn't blink more than he would have normally, but his breathing changed, not dramatically, not the way it does in films, but in the small mechanical way that bodies respond to threat before the brain has finished processing. I don't know what you think you've found, Marcus said. That's not an answer. Damien, Marcus. His voice was quiet, flat, the voice he used when the time for ambiguity was finished. I've known you for 15 years. I know how you stand when you're about to tell me a comfortable truth, and how you stand when you're about to tell me a convenient lie. Right now, you're about to tell me a convenient lie. I'm asking you not to, because the lie is going to make what comes next worse. Marcus looked at him for a long moment. Then very slowly, he sat down on the concrete floor. Not a chair. There wasn't one nearby. Just the floor. Like his legs had made a decision his pride hadn't quite agreed to yet. 8 years, Marcus said. Damien didn't react. He came to me 8 years ago. You'd been running the organization for 3 years at that point. He said he was worried about you, said you were making emotional decisions, that you'd started seeing a woman nobody knew anything about, and it was making you soft. Marcus stopped. His voice had the quality of something that had been tightly contained for a long time and was now releasing pressure. He said he needed someone on the inside to make sure you didn't compromise the organization. He paid you. Yes. To do what specifically? Marcus pressed his hands flat against his thighs. To manage your attention. When he needed you distracted, I gave you something to focus on. When he needed you away from a specific conversation or meeting, I manufactured a reason. He paused. And 2, shape your perception of Evelyn. The air in the warehouse changed. Shape it how? Damien said. She was the one Sebastian was actually afraid of. Marcus said it like a confession that had been eating him from the inside for years and was finally being expelled. Not as a threat to you, as a threat to him. He knew what she was within the first year of your marriage, knew what the Ashford Consortium represented, and he knew that if she ever made you understand what she was and who she was, you'd have access to resources and intelligence that would make you completely independent of him. He didn't want me independent. He never wanted you independent. Marcus's voice had gone dull. Everything he gave you, the training, the organization, the money, the name, it all had a leash on it, long enough that you never felt it pulling. But it was always there. He looked up at Damien. His eyes were tired. Not afraid, just tired. The way people get when they've been carrying something heavy for so long, they've forgotten what not carrying it felt like. I believed him at first, that I was protecting you, that she was dangerous, that her world would destabilize yours, that she didn't really love you the way you thought she did. He stopped, swallowed. That stopped being something I believed a long time ago, but by then I was so far in I didn't know how to be anywhere else. You could have told me. I know. At any point in 8 years, you could have told me. I know. His voice didn't flinch from it, and I didn't, and I'm not going to sit here and explain that away for you because there's no explanation that reaches the level of what it cost. He looked at his hands. She tried to reach you 3 weeks ago. She'd found evidence of what Sebastian was doing, not just to your organization, but systematically. She had documentation. She wanted to bring it to you directly and give you time to process it before anything escalated. His mouth tightened. I told Sebastian. He told me to make sure the meeting didn't happen. Damien stood. He didn't do anything. He just stood. But something about the way he moved, the very specific economy of it, made Marcus go very still. The regulatory filings against my real estate holdings, Damien said. Sebastian's people. They've been preparing them for 18 months, waiting for a moment of instability to file them. He created the instability. He created the divorce. Marcus looked at him steadily. He didn't force you to sign the papers, but he spent 8 years making sure you'd believe Evelyn was everything you were afraid of, soft, naive, a vulnerability. He made sure that when you finally decided to cut what you thought was a weakness, you'd cut her. The warehouse was very quiet. Somewhere in the building's upper structure, a bird moved through the rafters. Damien heard its wings, heard them settle. "Where is he?" asked. "His estate on the coast." "But Damien," Marcus stood. "He'll know I'm here. He'll have seen your people move on me. He's going to assume this conversation happened, and he's going to act on that assumption." "What does acting on it look like?" Marcus hesitated for the first time. Marcus. "He has a standing arrangement with 3 of the rival families. If he signals them, they move against you simultaneously within 6 hours. He held Damien's gaze. "He's been keeping them in reserve for 2 years, building toward a moment when you were isolated enough that the hit would be clean. He wants me dead. He wants you managed. Dead is his last option." Marcus's voice was flat. "But yes, if he thinks he's losing control of the situation entirely, if he thinks you're going to come at him with Evelyn's resources behind you, then yes, dead becomes preferable to out of control." Damien picked up his jacket from the back of the folding chair. "Thank you," he said. Marcus blinked, clearly hadn't expected that word. "For telling me now," Damien said. "It's late, but it counts for something." He walked toward the exit. "What happens to me?" Marcus called after him. Damien stopped, didn't turn. "Nothing, for now. You're more useful informed than disappeared." A pause. "But don't mistake that for forgiveness." He pushed through the warehouse door into the gray morning air. Outside, Rand was waiting with the car and an expression that said the morning had already produced developments that required reporting. "Talk," Damien said, getting in. "We got into the Halloran financials," Rand said, sliding into the driver's seat. "Sebastian's company has been moving money through 7 different channels, all of them engineered to look like independent transactions. But when you map the timing," he handed Damien his tablet, "every major financial pressure we've ever faced, every moment where we nearly went under and somehow pulled through, every inexplicable recovery." Damien looked at the tablet, understood almost immediately what he was seeing. "He was funding the attacks against us," he said slowly, "and simultaneously providing the resources to survive them. He was controlling the whole cycle," Rand said, "both sides, attack and rescue, making you dependent on his intervention, making you believe you needed him." The city moved past the car windows. Morning people walking fast, shoulders up against the residual chill from last night's storm. A woman carrying a child on her hip. A man arguing into his phone. Regular life happening at regular speed, indifferent to the fact that Damien Blackwood was sitting in a car 3 blocks away from his own manor, quietly learning that the father who made him was the enemy who had owned him. "There's something else," Rand said. His voice had changed again, that careful register that Damien was becoming grimly familiar with. "What?" "2 years ago, the shooting at the Leland Hotel. You were supposed to be at that dinner. The reservations were in your name. Someone tipped off a shooter, and at the last minute the dinner got moved to the private room downstairs, and the shooter hit an empty table." Rand's hands were very steady on the wheel. "We never found out who tipped off the shooter. We assumed it was a rival who wanted you scared rather than dead." Damien remembered it, had filed it away as one of a dozen near misses in a career that generated near misses regularly. "It wasn't a rival," he said. "No." Rand's voice was controlled, professional, but his knuckles were white. "The tip that moved you to the private room. It came from a source that masked itself through 4 relay points. I broke through 2 of them tonight." He stopped. "Tell me." "It was Evelyn." The car stopped at a light. Damien stared through the windshield. "She intercepted communication from the shooter," Rand said. "Intercepted it, confirmed the threat, arranged for the location change through a back channel that couldn't be traced to her. Didn't tell you, didn't tell anyone." He paused. "She just moved you out of the line of fire and went home and had dinner with you like nothing happened." The light changed. The car moved forward. Damien did not speak for a long time. When he did, his voice was stripped down to something raw and functional, the way voices get when emotion is present but has been set aside for practical reasons. "Get me to her," he said. "She's at the Ashford estate. It's 4 hours north and it's... I know how far it is." "Damien," Rand's voice was careful. "Her estate has security that will see us coming from 12 miles out. If she doesn't want to receive visitors, She'll receive me. He said it not with the confidence of a man who was certain, but with the urgency of a man who had run out of alternatives. She's been waiting 7 years for me to figure this out. She's not going to turn me away now. Rand drove. The city fell away behind them. The road north was long and gray and flanked by trees that were still wet from the storm, and the sky above was the particular white of a day that hadn't decided yet what it wanted to be. Damien sat in the back seat and held the guest book he had brought without thinking about it, without planning to, without any explanation he could have articulated cleanly. He opened it to the first page. Read her handwriting again. You saved me once without knowing my name. I intend to return the favor. He thought about a bullet that had crossed a hotel dining room and hit an empty chair. He thought about a 12-year-old girl in the back of a truck who had grown up and walked back into his life and spent 7 years standing between him and the dark without ever once asking him to notice. He thought about the look on her face when she walked out his front door last night. Not broken, not vindicated, not triumphant, just tired. The tired of someone who had been carrying too much for too long and had finally, at enormous cost, put it down. His phone buzzed. Unknown number again, he answered, the young woman's voice, the security division contact. Mr. Blackwood, I need to tell you something, and I need you to hear it before you arrive here. I'm listening. Madam Chairwoman knows you're coming. She's asked me to let you through. A pause. But there's been a development in the last hour. The evidence she's been compiling about the larger conspiracy, the one that engineered both your situation and hers. It's been accessed. Someone with inside access to our system got into the secure archive and copied 2 specific files. Cold moved through him. Which files? The documentation linking Sebastian Crow to the coordinated family attacks. And her voice tightened almost imperceptibly. The photograph. The one from the alley. Damien said nothing. Someone is trying to understand what Madam Chairwoman knows, she said, and how much it connects to you personally. We believe they'll use that information to... A sound on the line, sharp and sudden. Not an explosion, not a gunshot. Something electronic, the sound of a signal being interrupted. The line went dead. Damien pulled the phone from his ear, looked at the screen. Call ended. He looked up. Through the windshield, the road stretched ahead, wet and straight, and flanked by trees that bent slightly in a wind he couldn't feel from inside the car. Rand, he said, I heard. How far out are we? 90 minutes. He thought about files being copied, about the photograph, about a 12-year-old girl and a teenage boy in an alley, and how that single image, in the hands of someone who understood its meaning, was not just a piece of evidence, it was a weapon. Because it proved that Evelyn's loyalty to Damien predated everything. Predated the marriage, predated the meeting at the hotel, predated any calculation about alliances or power or mutual benefit. It proved she had found him on purpose, had chosen him for reasons that had nothing to do with his empire. And in the hands of someone who wanted to destroy them both, that proof of love was exactly the kind of leverage that could be used to make each of them believe the other had been lying all along. The car moved north at speed. The sky above was white and unresolved, and the trees kept bending in that wind he couldn't feel. And somewhere ahead, behind walls that could see him coming from 12 miles away, Evelyn Ashford was sitting with the knowledge that someone had just stolen the most important piece of her truth. And Damien understood, with the specific and irreversible clarity of a man who has just crossed a threshold he cannot uncross, that whatever happened in the next 12 hours would determine not just whether his organization survived. It would determine whether anything worth surviving for remained. The Ashford estate appeared through the tree line like something that had decided long ago not to announce itself. No gates visible from the road, no signage. Just a turn onto a gravel path that looked like it led to nothing, and then the trees thinned and the path widened and the house emerged. Not dramatically, not the way movie estates emerge with orchestral swell and sweeping camera angle, but gradually, the way very old, very serious things reveal themselves. Brick and slate and glass, 3 stories, no ornamentation that wasn't structural. A house that said nothing about the wealth inside it, which was, Damien understood now, precisely the point. Rand brought the car to a stop at a low stone barrier 50 meters from the front entrance. 4 men were already standing there. Black suits, no visible weapons, which meant the weapons were good enough not to be visible. One of them walked forward, checked Rand's face, checked Damien's, said nothing, and stepped aside. No greeting, no welcome, no theater, efficient. They were led inside by a woman in her 30s who walked fast and didn't fill the silence with words, which Damien respected on instinct. The interior of the house was clean and spare, good furniture, no clutter, art on the walls that looked chosen for meaning rather than value. The kind of space a person creates when they plan to actually live in it rather than impress guests. He was brought to a room on the second floor, a study. Bookshelves, a long work table covered in documents, screens along one wall showing live feeds from, he counted quickly, 11 separate locations. Financial data ran in columns down 2 of them. A map on the third, pin-marked in red across 4 continents. Evelyn was standing at the work table with her back to the door. She was still in the clothes from last night, or similar clothes. He couldn't be certain. Her hair was still up. There was a coffee cup near her right hand that looked like it had been there long enough to go cold. She heard him come in. Didn't turn immediately. Finished reading whatever she was reading, set it down with 2 fingers, then turned. She looked tired. Not destroyed. Not fragile. The specific tiredness of someone who has been working through a crisis for hours and has not yet reached the part where the crisis resolves. She looked at him the way you look at someone when you've already rehearsed this moment 100 times, and the reality of it is both exactly what you expected and completely different. "You made good time," she said. "Someone accessed your files," he said. "I know." "The photograph?" "I know, Damien." Her voice was quiet but not soft. It had edges. Not directed at him, just the edges of a person operating at the limit of what they can hold at once. "Sit down." He didn't sit. She looked at him for a moment, then let it go. Turned to the screens. Pulled up a document on the central monitor. 47 minutes ago, someone inside this network accessed the secure archive and extracted 2 files, the Crow documentation and the photograph. She pulled up a log. Lines of access data, timestamps, authentication codes. The authentication they used was valid, which means either someone inside this house is compromised or someone outside it has been inside our systems longer than we knew. Which is it? Neither. She tapped the screen. The authentication code highlighted in red. The access code belongs to a man named Elliot Marsh. He was the head of my technical security division, 12-year employee, one of 4 people who had archive-level clearance. She paused. He died in a car accident 8 months ago. Damien processed this. Someone kept his credentials active, he said. Someone kept them active, kept them current through 2 security audits, and planted them inside our rotation so they'd look legitimate if used. Her hand dropped from the screen. This wasn't improvised. This was prepared a long time ago. She turned to face him fully for the first time. Someone has been inside my organization longer than Sebastian has been inside yours. The room felt different suddenly, like the temperature had dropped. Who knew about Marsh's clearance level? Damien asked. 7 people in this organization, myself included. Her jaw tightened fractionally. I've already run the others. 6 of them have solid verification. Clean access logs, consistent behavior, no anomalies. That's 6. Yes. Who's 7? She was quiet for exactly 2 seconds. The silence had a specific texture to it. Not hesitation, but reluctance. The reluctance of someone who has reached a conclusion they do not want to have reached. My uncle, she said. Richard Ashford. He stepped back from operational involvement 4 years ago, nominally retired. He was the one who trained me, who ran the consortium for 20 years before I took over. She turned back to the screen. He's been like a father to me. There it was. Damien recognized the weight of that sentence because he had just spent the last 6 hours carrying its exact equivalent. The specific gravity of learning that the person who made you was also the person who was dismantling you. Where is he now? He asked. His residence in the north annex of this property. She reached for the cold coffee, seemed to realize it was cold, set it back down. I haven't approached him yet. She stopped, recalibrated. I needed to think through what I know before I say anything I can't take back. You need a witness, Damien said. She looked at him. Someone he won't expect in that room, Damien said. Someone whose presence changes the geometry of the conversation. Something moved across her face. Not gratitude exactly. more like the specific relief of a person who has been carrying a weight alone and has just been offered a hand, and is not certain yet whether accepting the hand is wise or safe or something they have the right to want. "You drove 4 hours," she said. "You didn't call ahead. You didn't wait for an invitation." "I was done waiting for invitations." "You were the one who signed the papers." "I know." 12 hours ago you decided I was a liability." 12 hours ago I was an idiot." He said it flatly. No performance, no dramatic self-flagellation, just the specific economy of a man stating a fact he has already accounted for and is trying to move past. "I have a lot of things to say to you about that. They're not going to fit into the next 5 minutes. But right now you have a problem that needs to be handled before it gets larger. And I'm here, and I'm useful, so use me." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she picked up a tablet from the work table, pulled up a floor plan, and said, "The north annex is connected to the main house through a covered walkway. Richard will be in his study at this hour. He doesn't vary his routine." She handed him the tablet. "He'll know something is happening. He's not a man who misses atmospheric shifts." She paused. "Don't underestimate him because he's 71 and acts like a professor." "What does he look like, angry?" "He doesn't look angry. That's the problem." They moved through the house quickly, Evelyn ahead by half a step because she knew the space and he didn't. The covered walkway was glass-roofed, long, flanked by dormant garden on both sides. Their footsteps were quiet on the stone floor. Outside, the sky had resolved itself into the flat white of midday overcast. Damien watched the back of Evelyn's neck as she walked, the way she held her shoulders. He thought about a bullet crossing a hotel dining room, thought about 7 years of being protected by someone he had decided was powerless, thought about the inscription in the wedding ring he had not yet seen but already knew existed somewhere in this building. He filed all of it. There would be time for it later. The study at the end of the north annex was warm, too warm, the deliberate warmth of someone who has gotten older and feels the cold differently now. Bookshelves floor to ceiling, a fire that had been burning for hours, a large desk. Behind the desk, an old man with white hair and wire-rimmed glasses, and the relaxed posture of someone who has been expecting company and has decided not to perform surprise. Richard Ashford looked at his niece, then at the man beside her and said, "Damien Blackwood, I've been wanting to meet you properly." His voice was the voice of a man who had spent decades being the most intelligent person in every room and had made peace with that fact without becoming insufferable about it. Warm, educational, the kind of voice that makes you want to agree with whatever it's about to say. Evelyn sat in the chair across from his desk. Damien remained standing. "The Marsh credentials," Evelyn said. No preamble. "Someone used them 47 minutes ago to access the secure archive." Richard looked at her with an expression of measured concern. "That's a serious breach." "It is." "Have you identified the point of access?" "The authentication originated from a device registered to this network," she said, "specifically to the North Annex." Richard didn't move, didn't blink out of sequence, didn't do any of the things a guilty man does in films. He simply sat with the information for a moment, the way a man sits with the chess position he's been studying, and then he said, "I see." Just that. "Richard?" Her voice had changed, still controlled, but something beneath the control was now visible, the way something sharp becomes visible through thin cloth. "I need you to tell me what happened." "What would you like me to say?" "I'd like you to tell me you didn't do it." He looked at her over the wire-rimmed glasses. Something in his face shifted, not into guilt, not into defiance, but into something sadder and more complicated than either. The look of a person who has reached the end of a very long and carefully managed deception and finds, now that it's over, that the ending brings less relief than expected. "I can't tell you that," he said. The fire crackled. Evelyn's hands were flat on her thighs, perfectly still. The stillness of someone keeping themselves together by will alone. "How long?" she asked. "Evelyn, how long, Richard?" He took off his glasses, set them on the desk, rubbed the bridge of his nose with 2 fingers, an old habit, the gesture of a man thinking through how to say something true without saying more of it than is necessary. "Since before your parents died," he said. The room went very still. Damien looked at Evelyn's profile, watched her absorb those 5 words. watched what they did to her face, which was almost nothing visible, which was worse than if she had reacted dramatically, because the nothing visible meant the impact was going somewhere too deep for expression. "What did you say?" Her voice was barely above conversational volume. "Your parents' death was not an accident," Richard said. The sadness in his voice was real. That was the worst part. Damien could hear that it was real. The organization was at a crossroads. Your father's direction would have changed everything, opened us to relationships and alliances that would have fundamentally restructured how we operated. I believed it was wrong. I believed it would expose us, weaken us, ultimately destroy what it had taken generations to build. He paused. I was not the only one who believed it, but I was the one who acted. "You ordered the hit on your own brother," Evelyn said. "I arranged the circumstances," Richard said. "I have never been comfortable with the word ordered." "I was 12. Her voice was flat, stripped of everything. "I watched them die. I ran through the streets for 3 days before anyone found me." "I know." And he did know. Damien could hear it. The specific weight of a man who has carried the knowledge of a thing he did to someone he loved and has lived with it long enough that the guilt has changed shape without diminishing. "I arranged for you to be found. I arranged for you to be brought home. I raised you. You raised me to run an organization you built on killing my father." Silence. "Why are you doing this now?" Damien said. Both of them looked at him. He had been so still they had perhaps both partially forgotten he was there. "The files you accessed," Damien said, moving closer to the desk. "The Crow documentation and the photograph. You accessed them 47 minutes ago. Why now? What changed in the last 12 hours that made you move?" Richard looked at him with an expression that was almost remarkably respect. The look of one chess player recognizing a move they hadn't anticipated. "You," he said simply. Damien waited. "When Evelyn left the consortium to marry you, I believed it was grief and impulse. A young woman who had been alone too long, attaching herself to a dangerous man for reasons that had more to do with emotion than judgment." He set his glasses back on. "When she stayed, I adjusted my assessment. When I began to understand what she was doing, quietly, patiently, maintaining your organization from the shadows while you believed you were running it yourself, I became concerned." "Concerned about what?" Evelyn said. "About what happens when he finds out." Richard looked at Damien. "A man like you, learning that the woman beside you has been managing your affairs without your knowledge for 7 years. Men like you respond to that kind of information in one of 2 ways. They feel grateful or they feel humiliated. Grateful men become partners. Humiliated men become threats." He paused. "I needed to know which you were before you walked through those gates." "So you accessed the files to—" Damien stopped, ran it back, felt the shape of it. "To send them to someone who would make sure I saw them in the worst possible framing, someone who could use the photograph as proof that Evelyn manipulated me, that the marriage was a calculated move, that she found you on purpose," Richard said quietly. "Which she did. And that fact, in the hands of someone who understood how you think, would have destroyed any chance of you and she working together before it began." "Who did you send them to?" Damien's voice had gone very flat. Richard looked at his niece. "Sebastian Crow." The fire popped. A log shifted. Evelyn stood up. She didn't speak, didn't move toward him. She stood with her hands at her sides and looked at her uncle across the desk with an expression that Damien recognized, not because he had seen it on her face before, but because he had felt its equivalent moving through himself in the warehouse that morning when Marcus said 8 years. The expression of someone restructuring their entire understanding of their own history in real time. "He'll use it to destroy you both separately," Richard said. His voice had the quality now of a man who has made a decision he knows is wrong, and has made it anyway, and is living, second by second, with what that means. "Crow wants the Blackwood organization. I want the consortium to remain what it has always been. We have overlapping interests in seeing this." He gestured between them. "This not happening." "You were working with Sebastian," Evelyn said. "The whole time." "Not the whole time. We came to an arrangement 3 years ago." He folded his hands on the desk. "I want you to understand. I don't enjoy this. I love you. I have always loved you. But love and organizational necessity are not the same thing, and I learned a long time ago not to confuse them. My father should have learned that lesson too, Evelyn said. From you. Richard said nothing. Damien's phone buzzed. He looked at it. Rand, 3 words. Crow is moving. He turned the phone so Evelyn could see it. She read it. Her jaw tightened. How long between when you sent the files and when Crow would act on them? Damien asked Richard. He already has what he needs, Richard said. He won't move immediately. He'll want to architect the narrative first. Make sure when the photograph circulates, the story attached to it is the right one. He paused. You have perhaps 4 hours before it becomes too large to contain. 4 hours to do what? Damien said. To decide. Richard looked at him with something very close to genuine sorrow. Whether you trust her. Not intellectually. Not whether you can calculate that she's been loyal to you. Whether you trust her. In the place where that decision actually lives. He held Damien's gaze, because what comes next requires it completely, and partial trust is the same as no trust when things go as wrong as they are about to go. Damien put the phone in his pocket, turned to Evelyn. She was looking at him already. Had been, he realized, for the last several seconds. Not with expectation, not with desperation, but with the particular composure of a woman who has spent 7 years learning not to need things she cannot afford to need, and has reached the limit of what that discipline can hold. He thought about the wedding guest book. Thought about a girl in an alley who had grown up and chosen him. Thought about every question he'd never asked and every silence he'd filled with the wrong assumptions, and every year of his adult life that had been, in ways he was only now beginning to map, made survivable by a woman he had decided was fragile. What do you need from me? He said. Something shifted in her face. Small, real. Complete access, she said. Everything in your organization, every contact, every arrangement, every leverage point you have. No filters, no management, no decisions made without me seeing them first. She paused. I know what that costs you. I know what it means to give someone that. I know what it means too, he said. Tell me the plan. She turned to the work table, pulled up the map with the red pins across 4 continents. Sebastian has the photograph and the documentation. He'll construct a narrative. Probably that I targeted you deliberately, that our marriage was a consortium operation to infiltrate the Blackwood organization, that everything I did was manipulation. He'll distribute it to every major family and faction in your network simultaneously. She traced her finger across the map. Once they believe it, your people won't trust you. My people won't trust me. We'll be simultaneously exposed and isolated. Unless we move first, Damien said. Unless we move first. She looked at him. Sebastian is going to be at the Vantage Summit in 4 days. It's an international gathering, not public, obviously, but attended by every significant organized power structure in the hemisphere. He's been planning to use it as the venue to announce the restructuring of the Blackwood organization under his oversight, with you either absent or cooperative. It's where he plans to burn us both. Yes. She pulled up a second screen, but it's also where every person he's been manipulating will be in the same room at the same time. And the Ashford Consortium has been quietly building a very specific kind of insurance for exactly this kind of moment. What kind of insurance? The kind that every person in that room has spent decades trying to bury. She looked at the screen steadily. Financial records, assassination orders, corrupted judicial appointments, manipulated intelligence. Not just Sebastian's. All of them. Every person who has ever done business with us has, over the years, provided us with enough material to end them. Damien understood the full shape of it now. Not a gunfight, he said. Not a gunfight. Her voice was precise. An implosion. We let them think they've won. We let them gather. And then we release everything simultaneously. And Sebastian? Her expression didn't change, but something behind it did. Sebastian is mine, she said. What he did to you. Using your trust, your loyalty, a child's need to be chosen. That requires an answer that I intend to deliver personally. The fire behind Richard Ashford had burned down while they talked. The room was cooler. Richard himself sat in his chair with the stillness of a man who has done what he has done and is sitting with the full weight of it. What happens to me? He said. It was the second time today Damien had heard that question. It sounded different from Richard than it had from Marcus. Less like fear, more like a man who has prepared himself to receive something he knows he deserves. Evelyn turned to look at her uncle, the man who had raised her, who had taught her everything, who had killed her parents and loved her anyway, and been willing to destroy her again to maintain the order he had built on their graves. "You'll cooperate with everything we need over the next 4 days," she said. "Every contact, every back-channel arrangement with Sebastian, every piece of intelligence you've shared with him. All of it. And after? After is a conversation I'm not ready to have yet." Her voice was steady, not cold, not forgiving. Somewhere in the difficult territory between them. "Right now I need your mind and your access. What you did when I was 12 years old, that's not something 4 days of cooperation resolves." She held his gaze. "But it's a start." Richard nodded. Once. The nod of a man accepting terms he has no standing to negotiate. Damien's phone buzzed again. This time it was a number he didn't recognize, different from the consortium security line. He answered anyway because the last 12 hours had recalibrated his tolerance for unknown variables. The voice on the other end was Sebastian Crow's. He had not heard that voice in 3 years. It was still the same, measured, warm, with the particular ease of a man who had never in his adult life been genuinely afraid of anything. "Damien," Sebastian said, "I hear you've been busy this morning." Damien said nothing. "I also hear you're at the Ashford estate, which is, I'll be honest with you, earlier than I expected. You were always faster than people gave you credit for." A pause. "I want you to know that nothing that's happened has been personal. You understand that. You know how this world worked. I want you to walk out of that house alone," Sebastian said, "without her. Walk away from whatever she's offering you and come talk to me directly, the way we used to. Man to man. No consortium, no apparatus, no history between you and a woman who chose you for reasons that were never as pure as she made them look. You've already sent the photograph." "I've sent nothing yet." His voice was patient. "I'm calling you first because I'd rather not use it. Because you are, whatever else is true, you are still the boy I found on that street corner 30 years ago, and I would like very much to resolve this without destroying everything both of us have built." Damien looked at Evelyn across the room. She was watching him. Not anxiously, not with instruction, simply watching, the way you watch someone at a moment that matters. He thought about Sebastian's voice at 16, patient, calm, offering structure to a kid who had none. Thought about everything he had been given and how the hand that gave it had always, quietly, kept hold of what it gave. Thought about a car bomb, a federal investigation, a bullet crossing a hotel dining room. Thought about who had actually kept him alive. "I'm going to say something to you," Damien said into the phone. "And I need you to hear it as a statement of fact, not a negotiating position." Sebastian waited. "She took a bullet for me," Damien said, 2 years ago, at the Leland Hotel. She intercepted the threat, moved me out of the line of fire, and went home and had dinner with me like nothing happened." He paused. "Whatever story you've built about her motives, about the photograph, about why she came back into my life, there is no version of that story that explains a bullet taken in silence." His voice was very quiet, very certain. "Do what you're going to do. We'll answer it." He ended the call, put the phone in his pocket, looked at Evelyn. "He's going to release the photograph," she said. It wasn't a question. Probably within the hour. He crossed the room to the work table, stood beside her, looking at the map, the red pins, the 4 days between now and the Vantage Summit. "How many of your people can we have in position by Thursday?" She was already pulling up a contact list. "Enough," she said. And for the first time in the conversation, for the first time he realized since she had walked out his front door into the rain the night before, the exhaustion in her face lifted slightly. Not into happiness, not into relief, into the particular focused energy of a person who has been waiting a very long time for the fight they actually wanted to be in. Her hand moved across the work table, reaching for a tablet. Her fingers passed within inches of his. Neither of them moved toward the other. Neither moved away. 4 days. The map waited. The red pins burned across 4 continents like a fire that had been laid very carefully for a very long time, waiting only for the moment when the right 2 people stood beside it together and decided, without hesitation, to light it. The photograph went public at 11:14 a.m. Damien was standing in the operations room the consortium staff had configured on the ground floor of the estate. 6 workstations, 12 screens, a dedicated encrypted line to every major contact across 3 continents. when his phone began generating notifications in the specific staccato rhythm of something spreading faster than containment allows. He looked at the first message, then the second. Then he put the phone face down on the table and said, "It's out." Evelyn was already looking at the central screen. The photograph, grainy, old, the two figures in the alley, had been released with a document attached. He didn't need to read the document to know what it said. He had written it himself, in the sense that Sebastian had simply taken the architecture of Damien's worst fears about the marriage and rendered them into clean, professional language. The document alleged that Evelyn Ashford's marriage to Damien Blackwood had been a consortium intelligence operation from inception, that her identification of him had been a targeting decision, that every protection she had extended over 7 years had been designed to create dependency, not love, that the boy in the photograph had been found, cataloged, and selected as a long-term asset before they ever met as adults. It was structured to be believed by people who wanted a reason to move against him. Within 18 minutes, 3 of his regional captains called. Within 25 minutes, 2 of them stopped calling and sent messages through intermediaries instead, which meant they were already hedging. Within 40 minutes, the Velasco brothers released a public statement, careful, lawyered, deniable, withdrawing from their existing agreements with the Blackwood organization, pending a review of recent developments. Pending a review. 30 years of fear-built loyalty, and it took Sebastian Crowe 40 minutes to make it conditional. "How many?" Evelyn asked. She was at the workstation beside his, moving through data with the focused efficiency of someone who has been through a crisis of this exact shape before and knows which numbers matter first. "Half are waiting to see which way it falls," Damien said. "A quarter are already moving. The rest?" He stopped, pulled up a message from a man named Cole Drayden, who ran the Southern Corridor operation and who Damien had known for 19 years. The message was 3 sentences. It said, "I've known you since you had nothing. I don't know what the truth is here, but I'm not moving until you tell me yourself." He held up the phone so Evelyn could read it. She read it, said, "That's 1. "That's enough," he said. "1 man who waits is better than 20 who run." She looked at him. Something passed between them that wasn't quite a smile. More the recognition between 2 people who are doing the same math and reaching the same conclusion and are, despite everything, doing it together. "The summit is in 71 hours, she said. "Sebastian will move before then. He won't be able to help himself. The photograph is out, momentum is his, and men like Sebastian don't hold momentum, they spend it." She pulled up a map of the summit venue, a private facility on the northern coast, owned, he noticed, by a holding company that probably traced back to something that traced back to something. He'll try to consolidate before Thursday. Reach out to the families individually, offer terms, lock them into his narrative before we can counter it. "Then we don't counter it," Damien said. She looked at him. "Every statement we release, every message we send, every call I make to explain myself, it's defensive. And defensive gives Sebastian the frame." He turned from the screen. "We go to them. In person. Now. Not all of them. The ones who are waiting. The ones like Cole who haven't moved yet." He picked up his jacket. "And we don't ask them to trust us. We show them who's been lying to them. The Crow documentation," she said, "not as evidence, as a conversation." He turned to her. "You've been in my world for 7 years and you've never let anyone see you. That changes today." She was quiet for a moment. The particular quiet of someone weighing a risk that has a specific and measurable cost. "If I walk into those rooms," she said carefully, "and they see who I am, what I represent, some of them will be more afraid of me than they are of Sebastian. Some of them, yes. That could push the undecided ones toward him. It could." He held her gaze. "Or it could remind them that they've been playing a rigged game without knowing it, and that the person who's been protecting the board all along just walked through their door and offered them a different set of rules." He paused. "People who've been lied to don't want more data. They want to be able to look someone in the eye." She studied him for a long 3 seconds. Then she closed the laptop. "I need 2 hours to brief my security team," she said. "And I need you to understand that if we do this, there's no version where your organization looks the way it did before, even if it works. I know. You built that organization on fear. This dismantles that." "I know, Evelyn." She picked up her jacket. "Good," she said. "Then let's go." They moved in 2 vehicles with minimal staff, 4 of her people, Rand and 1 man from Damien's southern operation who knew the roads and the faces. No convoy, no theater. The opposite of 20 black Rolls-Royces, because the moment required a different kind of statement. The first meeting was Cole Drayden, in a restaurant he owned in the city that they reached by mid-afternoon. Cole was a big man in his late 50s with a gray beard and the particular wariness of someone who has survived long enough to distrust anything that looks like good news. He was already seated when they arrived, coffee in front of him, 2 men at the bar who were trying to look like regular patrons and failing. He looked at Damien, then at Evelyn. His expression didn't change, but something behind it sharpened. "So she's real," he said. "She's real," Damien said. "Sit down." Cole looked at Evelyn directly, not with hostility, with the focused attention of a man taking a careful measurement. The document Sebastian released. The part about the targeting operation, about you choosing him deliberately. "I chose him deliberately," Evelyn said. "The document is correct about that." Cole blinked. "He saved my life when I was 12 years old," she said. "He didn't know who I was. He didn't know my name. He had nothing to gain and something to lose, and he got me out anyway." Her voice was steady, completely unperformed. "When I found him again as an adult, I made a decision. I decided that a man who did that, in those circumstances, was a man worth choosing. That's the extent of the operation." Cole looked at her for a long time. Then he looked at Damien. "You believe her," Cole said. Not a question. "I believe her," Damien said. "Even the part where she's been managing half your operation without telling you." Damien's jaw tightened. "Especially that part. Because everything she managed right, and I've been too proud to notice." Cole drank his coffee, set the cup down very carefully. "What do you need from me?" he said. "Thursday," Evelyn said. "The summit. We need you there, and we need you to bring Hartwell and the Northern Bloc if you can reach them. Hartwell won't move for sentiment." "We're not offering sentiment." She slid a drive across the table. Thin, matte black, no markings. "Everything Sebastian Crow has done to Hartwell's operation in the last 4 years. The financial interference, the intelligence he sold to the Garza family that triggered the warehouse fire in March, the federal contact he maintains who's been keeping a file on Hartwell that Sebastian controls." She held Cole's gaze. "Hartwell has been living under a sword Sebastian built for 8 years. He doesn't know the sword exists. When he does, he'll want to be in the room when it falls," Cole said. "Yes." Cole picked up the drive. "I'll make the call," he said. They left the restaurant at 4 p.m. and drove for 90 minutes to reach the second meeting, which was harder and louder and ended with a man named Briscoe putting his fist through a side table when he understood the full scope of what Sebastian had done to his operations financial architecture over 6 years. The table didn't survive. The meeting did. Briscoe was in. The third meeting, at 7 p.m., in a private room above a shipping facility, was the one that almost broke. The man waiting for them was Vincent Marr. 63. Immaculate suit, eyes like ball bearings, small, gray, giving nothing. He had been in this world longer than either Damien or Evelyn had been alive, and he had survived it through one organizing principle. He never committed to anything that couldn't be uncommitted. He looked at Damien across the table and said, "Sebastian called me this morning." "I know," Damien said. "He offered me the Eastern Corridor, your Eastern Corridor, and a guarantee of federal protection for the next 3 years. Mare folded his hands. "That's not nothing." "It isn't," Damien agreed. "So tell me why I should walk away from that and into whatever you're building." Evelyn opened a folder on the table between them, pushed it toward Mar. He looked at it, turned a page, turned another. His expression didn't change, but his hands did. The fingers tightened fractionally on the paper, the way hands do when the brain is processing something the face isn't allowed to show. "That's the federal contact Sebastian is using," Evelyn said. "You'll see on page 4 that the guarantee he offered you this morning is specifically contingent on you delivering something to that contact, something that contact has been trying to build a case around for 11 years. She paused. "You're not being offered protection, Mr. Marr. You're being offered as collateral." Marr looked at the folder for a long time. He closed it. "Thursday," he said. Back in the car, moving through the dark toward the estate, Rand driving, Evelyn's security in the vehicle ahead, Damien sat beside her in the back seat and felt the accumulated weight of 14 hours press down through his shoulders and into his hands, which were not shaking but wanted to. "You should eat something," Evelyn said. "So should you." A pause. "There's a place 20 minutes from the estate," she said. "It's nothing, a diner. They have good soup." He looked at her in the dark of the car. The motorway lights moved across her face in intervals, bright, dark, bright, dark. And each time the light came, he saw something slightly different: exhaustion, focus, something quieter underneath both. "Soup," he said. "Don't make it complicated." They ate at a corner booth in a diner that smelled like coffee and fried oil and was populated at 9 p.m. by a night shift nurse, 2 college students, and a man asleep over a newspaper. Nobody looked at them. Nobody knew that the 2 people eating soup in the corner booth were 48 hours from walking into a room that would either restructure the organized power landscape of 3 continents or get them both killed. Damien ate, felt the food reach somewhere real. Evelyn had both hands around the soup bowl, the way you hold something hot when you're cold and you're past being subtle about it. "The bullet," he said. She looked up. "At the Leland Hotel. You took a round." "Grazed," she said. "Left shoulder. It wasn't—" "Show me." She held his gaze for a moment. Then she reached up with her right hand and pushed the fabric of her collar aside, and there it was. A scar, 4 inches, silver white against her skin, the specific shape of something that had happened fast and hurt slow. He looked at it, looked away. "Why didn't you tell me?" he said. His voice was low, not accusatory, the question of a man genuinely trying to understand something. "Because you would have asked questions," she said, "and the answers would have led to other questions, and eventually you would have understood what I was. And I wasn't ready for that." She pulled the collar back. "I wanted more time." "More time for what?" She was quiet for a moment. "For you to know me," she said. "Not the consortium, not the apparatus. Me, the person." She looked down at her soup. "I was afraid that when you found out what I was, you'd stop seeing who I was." He said nothing. Because there was nothing to say that didn't arrive too late, and with too many apologies attached to it, and apologies were not the language this moment needed. What it needed was something simpler and harder. The recognition, made without ceremony, that she had been right to be afraid, and that he had been exactly the man she feared he was. And that sitting here now in this diner that smelled like coffee, he was something still being determined. "I'm sorry," he said. "For the papers. For 7 years of—" He stopped. "For not asking." She looked at him. "I know," she said, simply, without the performance of forgiveness, without the theater of emotion. Just, "I know." The words of someone who has already processed the apology in the 14 hours since it became necessary and has arrived, not without cost, at a place that isn't resentment. They drove back to the estate in the kind of quiet that isn't empty. The next 36 hours moved at 2 speeds simultaneously, the grinding slow of preparation and the terrifying fast of a clock that wouldn't negotiate. Evelyn's technical team built the package that would be deployed at the summit. Not a hack. They weren't breaking into anything. They were releasing what the consortium already held, through channels that were already established, to parties that were already positioned. 12 encrypted servers, each one containing a designated portion of the material, each one to be activated simultaneously by a single signal. The signal would come from Evelyn. Damien worked alongside Rand to manage the organizational communications, quieting the factions that were panicking, maintaining the appearance of business as usual for the surveillance Sebastian undoubtedly had on his operation, and coordinating the arrivals of Cole, Briscoe, Marr, and the 7 others who had committed by Wednesday morning. Wednesday afternoon, Richard Ashford walked into the operations room. He looked smaller than he had in his study. Not physically. He was the same man, same wire-rimmed glasses, same deliberate posture. But something about being in a room where active work was happening against the architecture he'd helped build seemed to reduce him. He sat down without being asked, looked at Evelyn. "I can get you into the summit's communications infrastructure," he said. "Sebastian set up a closed network for the event. I helped him design it. I know the back channel." He paused. "If you want to broadcast his confession, Not just to the people in the room, but to every device on the network, every secured line. I can open that. Evelyn looked at him for a long time. Why? She said. Because I am. He stopped, started again. Because what I did to your parents cannot be addressed by cooperation over 4 days. But this can't make it worse. His voice was dry and factual, and underneath it was something so old and so heavy that Damien, who was not a man easily moved by other people's grief, felt the weight of it from across the room. And because you are the only thing your father built that still exists, and I find, late, too late, I know, that I would like it to keep existing. Evelyn was quiet. Then she turned to her technical lead. Get him a workstation. Thursday came the way Thursdays come, without ceremony, without regard for what was waiting on the other side of it. The summit facility was a private complex on the northern coast. Glass and concrete set into a cliff top, visible from the water but accessible only by a single road that had been surveilled for 48 hours by Sebastian's people. The official security sweep had happened Wednesday morning. 43 guests were expected. 43 of the most significant organized power figures in the hemisphere, assembled under the fiction of a business summit, actually gathered to watch Sebastian Crow present his restructuring of the post-Blackwood landscape. Damien's convoy arrived separately from Evelyn's. This was deliberate. Sebastian would be watching the arrivals. He expected Damien to either not appear, confirming the collapse, or to appear alone, diminished, negotiating from weakness. He did not expect Evelyn, and he could not be allowed to see her coming. Damien walked through the front entrance of the summit facility at 9:40 a.m. in a suit he'd had pressed at the estate and a face that revealed nothing, flanked by Rand and 2 others, carrying nothing except the knowledge of what was supposed to happen in the next 2 hours, and the absolute uncertainty of whether it would. The atrium was full. He felt them before he could identify them individually. The shift in the room's atmosphere when he entered, the recalibration of 43 sets of eyes that had, for the last 48 hours, been processing the narrative Sebastian had constructed about his fall. Some of them looked away. Some met his gaze with the careful neutrality of men who hadn't yet decided. Cole Drayden, standing near the far wall with a coffee cup, gave him the single most minimal nod in the history of human communication. Sebastian was at the center of the room. He looked exactly the way Damien remembered him. Well-dressed, unhurried, the posture of a man who believes the room belongs to him, because every room he has entered for 40 years has eventually agreed. He was 70, or close to it, with white hair and the specific vitality of someone who has spent decades in power and has not yet paid the physical cost of it. He turned when Damien entered. He smiled. The smile of a man who is pleased because the presence of his opponent confirms that the opponent has not understood the situation. Damien, his voice carried across the atrium just enough. I'm glad you came. Sebastian. Damien crossed the room toward him, slowly, with the unhurried confidence he had spent 30 years building. We need to talk. Of course we do. Sebastian touched his arm. The gesture of a father, performed precisely. I've set aside time before the main session. There's still a way through this that doesn't require— Not privately, Damien said. Here. Now. The room went quiet the way rooms go quiet when they recognize that something real is happening in them. Sebastian's smile stayed in place, but something behind his eyes recalibrated. Damien, you've spent 30 years teaching me that strength means needing nothing, Damien said. His voice was level and clear and large enough to reach every corner of the atrium without being raised. No attachments, no vulnerabilities, no one beside you that your enemies can use against you. He looked at the man who had found him at 16 and built him into something that served a purpose he hadn't known he was serving. I believed you. For 30 years I believed you. And every time I started to need something real, you were there with a reason why it would destroy me. This isn't the time. You're right, Damien said. It's 30 years too late, but it's the time we have. He looked around the room, 43 faces, some hostile, some carefully blank. Some, Cole, Briscoe, Marr, 7 others, watching with the specific alertness of people waiting for a signal. You've all seen the photograph, Damien said. The document Sebastian released. The story about a woman who chose me as an asset rather than a person. He let that sit for a moment. I spent 4 hours believing it. I want you to know that because it matters. He built that story out of something real, She did choose me deliberately. She found me on purpose. She came back into my life knowing exactly who I was. The room was very still. She also took a bullet for me 2 years ago and went home and had dinner with me and didn't say a word. His voice was steady. She stopped 6 assassination attempts over 7 years. She neutralized every major threat to my operation without ever asking for credit or control. He paused. Not because I was an asset, because she made a decision when she was 12 years old and I pulled her out of an alley and disappeared that I was worth coming back for. A door opened at the back of the atrium. Evelyn walked in. She was dressed in black, hair up, moving the way she moved through the covered walkway at the estate, like someone who knows the space and doesn't need to announce herself in it. Beside her, 3 members of her security team and 1 technical operative carrying a slim case. Sebastian turned. For the first time in 30 years of knowing the man, Damien saw something shift in his face that did not belong to calculation. It was fear, not performed, not controlled, the animal kind, arriving without permission. Sebastian Crow, Evelyn said. Her voice was not raised. It didn't need to be. You have been the organizing intelligence behind 7 years of coordinated attacks on both the Blackwood Organization and the Ashford Consortium. You have manipulated 12 family structures, corrupted 4 federal contacts, and maintained a private intelligence network built on documentation you've collected through illegal surveillance of everyone in this room. The room erupted. Not into chaos, into the specific controlled eruption of 43 powerful people simultaneously registering that they are in a room where something they need to understand is being said. Sebastian moved, not toward Evelyn, toward the exit at the room's east side, the efficient movement of a man who has always had an exit and has always known where it was. Rand was already there. 2 of Evelyn's people were already at the secondary exit. Sebastian stopped, turned, looked at Damien, and in the look was something Damien had not expected. Not the cold fury of a man whose plan has failed, but the complicated devastation of someone looking at a person they raised and registering, for the first time, that the raising did not create ownership. You don't understand what you're dismantling, Sebastian said. His voice had lost its warmth. What was underneath was harder and older and more honest than anything Damien had heard from him in 30 years. The order I've maintained, the balance you built on bodies, Evelyn said. Every structure is built on bodies. His voice cracked, not with emotion, but with the strain of a man who has believed something completely for so long that being required to defend it out loud has exposed how much of its weight was carried by silence. Everything you have, everything this room has, it exists because someone a long time ago made decisions that looked exactly like what you're accusing me of now. That's probably true, Evelyn said, and those people should have been stopped too. She looked at him steadily. I'm not interested in the philosophy. I'm interested in the last 30 years. She looked at her technical operative. The operative opened the case. 12 drives, arranged in a single row. Each person in this room, Evelyn said, has been the subject of illegal surveillance conducted by Sebastian Crow's network for between 4 and 18 years. Financial interference, intelligence sharing with rival operations, manipulated federal contacts, documented communications being used as leverage. She looked around the room. Each drive contains what he has on you and what he's done with it. She paused. We're giving it back. The technical operative began placing drives on the table at the room's center. The room moved, not toward the exits, but toward the table. Sebastian stood very still. Damien crossed the room toward him slowly. The 2 men stood 3 feet apart. Up close, in the morning light coming through the facility's north-facing windows, Sebastian looked his age in a way he never had before. Not diminished, but real. The specific reality of a man whose architecture has just been removed from around him and who is standing, for perhaps the first time, without it. I pulled you out of nothing, Sebastian said quietly. Just to Damien. The room moving and talking around them, the drives being distributed, Evelyn managing the controlled chaos with the efficiency of someone who has rehearsed it, all of that continuing while these 2 men stood in the eye of it. I gave you everything. I know, Damien said, and this is what you do with it. This is what I do with it. He held the old man's gaze. You taught me that strength means not needing anything. You were wrong. But you taught me everything else. The patience, the reading of a room, The understanding of leverage, all of it. I used it. I'm using it right now. He paused. I'm not ungrateful, Sebastian. I'm just finished. Sebastian looked at him for a long moment. Then, very slowly, the thing that had been holding his face in its customary arrangement released. What was underneath was not fury. It was the exhausted, complicated grief of a man who has spent 40 years winning by making sure he was always the most necessary person in the room, and has arrived at the morning when the room has decided it can function without him, and finds the experience more painful than he had ever allowed himself to anticipate. She's going to change you, Sebastian said. She already has. That wasn't a criticism, Sebastian said quietly. It was the thing I was afraid of. Evelyn appeared at Damien's side. She looked at Sebastian Crow. The man who had engineered her divorce, manipulated her husband, worked with her uncle to bury 30 years of carefully constructed truth. She looked at him the way she looked at most things, steadily, without heat, with the patience of someone who has already made their decision and is simply waiting for the moment to execute it. There are people outside, she said to him. They'd like to speak with you about the federal contacts you've maintained. I'd recommend cooperating. A pause. It will go better for you than the alternative. Sebastian looked at her, then at Damien. Then he straightened his jacket, an old habit, automatic, the gesture of a man maintaining form when substance has departed, and turned toward the door. Rand fell into step behind him. The room was moving, talking, processing. The drives were in hands. People were reading on phones, conferring in low voices, doing the math that people do when they realize the board has been restructured beneath them while they were watching a different game. Damien stood in the middle of it, felt something he didn't have an immediate name for. Not triumph, which he'd felt before and which felt like expansion. This was different, more like something being set down, something he hadn't realized he was carrying until the moment his hands were empty. Evelyn stood beside him, not close, shoulder to shoulder, the way colleagues stand when a meeting has reached its critical juncture, and both of them know the next 60 seconds will determine everything. And standing together is not sentiment but strategy, but also quietly, undeniably, something that isn't only strategy. On the far side of the room, at a workstation the technical team had pre-positioned, a screen came to life. Richard Ashford's interface, the back channel into Sebastian's communications network, opened precisely as promised. Evelyn looked at it, looked at Damien. Ready? She said. He looked at the room. 43 people reading drives that contained the truth about the last 30 years of their lives. The noise of a structure collapsing and a different one beginning to define its own weight. Looked at the screen. Looked at her. Hit it, he said. Her hand moved toward the activation key, and the room around them held its breath without knowing it was holding it. And somewhere on the northern coast, the morning sea moved against the cliff below the glass and concrete building in the particular indifferent rhythm of something that has been moving since long before any of this and will be moving long after. And Damien Blackwood stood beside Evelyn Ashford and watched her hand fall toward the key that would determine whether the story they had spent 7 years failing to tell each other would finally be heard by the world that had tried so hard to prevent it from being told at all. Evelyn's hand came down on the key. The screen on the far wall went white for exactly 2 seconds. The specific white of a system pushing more data through more channels simultaneously than any single moment is designed to carry. And then it resolved into a cascade of confirmation signals, green lines appearing one after another as each of the 12 encrypted servers released its contents to the designated recipients. Financial records, surveillance logs, assassination orders bearing the signatures of men currently standing in this room, holding drives that contained the proof of what had been done to them, corrupted judicial appointments, intelligence sold across enemy lines. Every federal contact Sebastian Crow had compromised, documented with timestamps and transaction records precise enough to survive any legal challenge anyone in any jurisdiction wanted to bring. 43 devices in 43 pockets and briefcases in this room began generating alerts simultaneously. And beyond this room, because Richard had opened the back channel exactly as promised, the same material was moving through Sebastian's own closed summit network to every secured line connected to it, reaching people who were not in this building, people across 3 continents who had been operating inside Sebastian's information architecture for years without knowing its shape, people who would spend the next 72 hours understanding with the particular cold shock of the genuinely surprised, that the world they thought they inhabited had different walls than they believed. The room did not erupt. That was the thing Damien would remember later. It did not erupt. There was no shouting, no chaos, no "the building is on fire" kind of panic that films associate with moments of systemic collapse. What happened instead was something quieter, and in some ways more complete. The room simply changed register. 43 people absorbed information at 43 different speeds, and as they absorbed it, the quality of the air in the room altered, the way air alters when a pressure system moves through. Not with noise, but with a shift that you feel before you can name it. Coldraden read something on his phone, looked up at Damien across the room, and gave a single slow nod. Vincent Marr rid his drive for 4 unbroken minutes, standing perfectly still, then closed it, put it in his breast pocket, and walked to the corner of the room and made a phone call in a voice too low to hear. 3 men Damien didn't recognize by name left through the east exit in quick succession, not running, moving with the purposeful speed of people who have understood something and need to be somewhere else before the understanding becomes public knowledge. Sebastian was no longer in the room. Rand had taken him through the north exit 20 minutes ago, where a car was waiting and 2 men from Evelyn's legal division were already prepared to begin the process of documentation that would be required by the federal contacts Evelyn had cultivated. Not the corrupted ones, the real ones, the ones who had been trying for years to build a case against Sebastian Crow's network and had been watching their work disappear into the void of Sebastian's interference. They would not watch it disappear today. Evelyn stood at the center of the room and managed the controlled dissolution of the summit with the efficiency of someone who had planned this precise moment and understood that the planning was never really about the dramatic instant of activation. It was about everything that came after, the 1,000 small decisions that determined whether a collapse became a foundation or just rubble. She moved from person to person, not performing, not presenting, talking, listening, making specific commitments to specific people about specific things, demonstrating in the vocabulary of this world, concrete terms, measurable outcomes, the language of people who trust actions over words, that what came next had a shape and that the shape was workable. Damien watched her work. He had watched her work for 7 years without knowing he was watching her work. And now that he knew, the watching had a different quality. Not admiration exactly, which implies distance, but recognition. The recognition of someone seeing clearly for the first time something that was always in front of them. Briscoe appeared at his elbow. "Sebastian's network," Briscoe said. "The federal contacts. How long before they move on it?" 72 hours, Damien said, maybe less. "And the families that were already moving against you before today?" "That depends on today." He looked at the room. Some of them were moving because Sebastian gave them a reason. The reason is gone. Some of them were moving because they smelled weakness. That's harder. "Which ones?" "Garza." Damien's jaw tightened slightly. Garza was moving because Garza wanted to move and Sebastian's intelligence gave him cover for it. Cover's gone. The wanting isn't. Briscoe nodded. Thought about it. "Garza's eastern operation has a problem," Briscoe said carefully. "A financial problem. The kind that becomes very visible when certain documentation reaches certain regulators." He paused. "Hypothetically, if someone had that documentation." Damien looked at him. Briscoe's expression was entirely neutral. "Talk to Evelyn's people," Damien said. "The woman at the 3rd workstation, dark jacket. Tell her I sent you." Briscoe moved away. The room continued its slow, deliberate transformation. The summit that had been designed as Sebastian Crow's coronation becoming, hour by hour, the first working session of something that didn't have a name yet, but was already functioning. At noon, Evelyn found Damien standing near the north-facing windows, looking out at the water. The sea was gray-green and moving steadily, the kind of sea that doesn't perform for observers. She stood beside him. Neither of them spoke for a moment. "Richard's interface held," she said finally. "The broadcast reached every node Sebastian had. His people are already in contact with each other trying to assess the damage. By tonight they'll understand there's nothing to assess. It's not damage. It's dissolution." "How are you?" he asked. She was quiet for a beat, long enough that he turned to look at her. "I've been better," she said. It was the most unguarded thing he had heard her say in 7 years. Not a crack in the composure, more like a deliberate setting aside of it. a choice to be briefly visible. My uncle helped us today. He sat at that workstation for 4 hours and opened every back channel Sebastian had, and did not hesitate once. She looked at the water. I don't know what to do with that. You don't have to know yet. I know. She pressed her lips together. It doesn't resolve what he did. Nothing does. But She stopped, started again. He looked like my father today. For about 30 seconds, when the broadcast confirmed. He looked exactly the way my father used to look when something he built worked the way it was supposed to. Damien said nothing. Let it sit. I'm going to cry later, she said, with the flat matter-of-factness of a person making a logistical note. Not now, later. I wanted you to know so it doesn't alarm you. It wouldn't alarm me. It alarms me, she said. I'm working on it. Despite everything, despite 14 hours of crisis and 43 people in a room processing the end of the world they knew, and Sebastian Crow being driven somewhere by Rand to account for 30 years of controlled destruction, despite all of it, Damien felt something move through him that was, unmistakably, the structural precondition of a laugh. He contained it. She looked at him, saw that he was containing it. Her own expression shifted, not quite a smile, but the shadow of one, the impression left by something genuine passing close to the surface. Don't, she said. I'm not, he said. You were about to. I was absolutely not about to laugh at you. You were. I was moved, he said, by your emotional honesty. She looked at him for a long moment, then she turned back to the water. Idiot, she said. And there it was. Something small and real and theirs dropped into the middle of the wreckage of 7 years like a stone dropped into water, and the rings it made moved outward quietly in all directions. The afternoon brought complications. At 2 p.m., confirmation arrived that 3 of Sebastian's federal contacts, not the corrupted ones, the operational ones, the ones who had been functioning as genuine assets while simultaneously being managed by Sebastian, had gone to ground, disappeared. Off-grid, devices dark, last known locations, the previous evening. Evelyn's security division moved immediately to locate them, but the going to ground told its own story. These were people who understood that what had been released this morning would, within days, reshape the legal landscape around everything they had done for Sebastian over the last decade, and they had made the rational decision of people who have advanced knowledge of a flood. They'll surface eventually, Evelyn said, in the operations room at the estate to which they had returned by 3 p.m. You can't stay off-grid forever. When they surface, they'll be looking for the best deal available, and the best deal available will require them to cooperate. Unless Sebastian reaches them first, Rand said. Sebastian is currently in a room with 2 federal liaisons and a lawyer who has been trying to bring a case against his network for 6 years, Evelyn said. He is not reaching anyone. He'll have made arrangements, Damien said, for this contingency. Sebastian always makes arrangements. He did. She pulled up a document on the central screen. He has a standing protocol. If his network goes dark, certain people receive certain signals and execute certain pre-planned responses. We found the protocol in the archive. She paused. We've already intercepted the signals. The responses won't happen. Rand looked at her, then at Damien, then back at her. Is there anything you don't have a document for? Rand said. Several things, she said. I'll let you know if they become relevant. At 4 p.m., Marcus Hale called Damien's phone. Damien almost didn't answer, stood with the phone in his hand and the name on the screen and thought about a man who had spent 8 years managing his attention on behalf of the person who built him, and decided that the debt of information Marcus had paid yesterday in the warehouse was not settled, but was sufficient for the call to be worth taking. Marcus, he said. It's done then. Not a question. Marcus had been watching the news channels, the financial feeds, the ripple effect that was already visible in the public-facing corners of the organized world. I saw the federal announcement an hour ago. It's done. A pause. I want to say something, and I want you to hear it as what it is, not as an attempt to negotiate anything. Marcus's voice was tired. Not the tired of someone who has lost, the tired of someone who has been carrying something heavy for too long and has finally, today, put it down. I believed for the first 3 years that I was protecting you. After that, I was protecting myself. I know the difference between those two things, and I know which one drove the larger portion of what I did. Another pause. I'm sorry, Not for your benefit. You don't need my sorry. For mine. Because I need to have said it out loud. Damien stood at the window of the operations room. Outside, the estate's grounds were gray and still in the late afternoon light. "Where will you go?" he said. "Somewhere that isn't here," Marcus said. I have some money that's clean. Not much, but clean. I know a place in the Northwest." He paused. "Don't look for me." "I won't," Damien said. And Damien, his voice shifted, barely. "Don't make the same mistake with her that you've been making for 30 years with everything else. She's not your organization. She's not a liability. She's not a strength to be leveraged." He paused. "She's a person. You know that now. Don't forget it when things get easy again." The call ended. Damien stood with the phone at his side and looked at the gray grounds and thought about a man he had known for 15 years walking away into a Northwest somewhere with clean money and the particular exhausted freedom of someone for whom accounts had been settled at significant cost. He thought, at least he knows it. That was something. At 6 p.m., confirmation arrived of the development that Evelyn had described as the final necessary piece, the one that determined whether what had happened at the summit today was a decisive break or merely a significant disruption. The Garza family withdrew, not through a statement, not through a formal communication, through the specific silence of a family that had extended its position based on intelligence it no longer held and momentum it could no longer sustain, and had decided with the pragmatism of people who survive by reading atmospheres correctly, that the atmosphere had changed. The Velasco brothers called 20 minutes later. Personal call, direct line, the kind of call that happens when a decision has been made at the level where decisions actually live. Damien took it. The call lasted 9 minutes. At the end of it, the existing agreements were reinstated with language that acknowledged the last 48 hours without dwelling on them. The language of people who have been on the wrong side of something and know it and are choosing to acknowledge it by moving correctly, rather than by extensive verbal accounting. Cole Drayden texted 3 words. Northern Bloc confirmed. The structure wasn't what it had been, but it was something. At 7:30 p.m., Evelyn found Damien in the kitchen of the estate making coffee badly. He had not found the filters and had improvised with what appeared to be a folded piece of paper towel, and the results were sitting in a mug looking optimistic about themselves in a way that their contents did not justify. She looked at the mug. "There's a proper machine," she said. "The second cabinet on the left. I found this one. That's not a filter. It's filter adjacent." She opened the second cabinet on the left, found the correct filters. Rebuilt the process without comment, which was, he was coming to understand, one of the things she did. She fixed problems without narrating the fixing, without requiring acknowledgement, without making the fix about anything other than the coffee. He watched her do it. "Sebastian's legal processing will take months," she said. She was talking to the coffee machine but also to him, the particular mode of conversation that happens when people are tired and the crisis has passed its acute phase, and the words that needed to be said in formal settings can now be said while doing small domestic things. The federal case is solid, the documentation is thorough, but his lawyers are going to argue every page. It won't be clean. It doesn't need to be clean, Damien said. It needs to be real. It's real. She pressed the start button on the machine, turned, leaned against the counter. Richard's cooperation testimony is the most significant piece. Without it, the case has weight, but not precision. With it, she paused. With it, Sebastian doesn't see the outside of a courtroom for the remainder of his functional life. And Richard? She was quiet. That decision involves more people than me, she said finally. There are families. There are people my parents trusted who were affected by what he arranged. Their input matters before mine. She looked at her hands. I've contacted 3 of them already. Over the next few weeks, more. She looked up. Whatever is decided, I will accept. I owe them that much. The coffee machine finished its work. She poured 2 cups, handed him one. He held it. The warmth of it reached through his palms into the rest of him, into the bones that had been cold since some point the previous night that he hadn't specifically identified. The wedding ring, he said. She looked at him over her coffee cup. The inscription. He held her gaze. You had it inscribed before we were married. Yes. You knew when you had it made that I might never see it. I knew it was possible. But you had it made anyway. She set her cup down on the counter, thoughtful, working through how to say something true in the right number of words. I am a person who makes long investments, she said. I always have been. My father was the same way. She met his eyes. I wasn't sure what you would become, but I believed in the direction of you, the trajectory. She paused. The boy in that alley was moving in a specific direction, even in the worst circumstances of his life. You moved toward the person in trouble. You didn't have to. You had nothing to gain and everything to lose. She picked up her coffee again. That direction doesn't disappear. It goes underground sometimes. But it doesn't disappear. He looked at her. I'd like to try again, he said. Not with performance. Not with the architecture of a negotiation or a proposal. Simply that, stated plainly, the words of a man who has arrived at clarity too late and is trying to do something useful with it anyway. Not the same thing. Not what we had, which I understand now was half of what it should have been because I was only half paying attention. Something different. Something where I actually... He stopped. Something where I know who I'm looking at. She was quiet for a moment. The kitchen held the warmth of the coffee and the specific domestic quiet of a house that has been the site of a crisis and is now in the first hour of something different. Ask me something, she said. He looked at her, didn't understand. You said you never asked, she said. 7 years and you never asked. So ask me something, anything, something you actually want to know. He thought about it. For a moment he almost reached for something safe, something manageable, something that didn't expose him fully. And then he thought, she took a bullet and went home and made dinner and didn't say a word, and the impulse toward safety felt like an insult to that. What did you want, he said, when you were 12 years old, before all of it, before your parents died and the consortium and the alley and everything that came after? What did you actually want? She looked at him. Something in her face changed, not dramatically, not the way faces change in films with swelling music and close-up lenses, but the small, specific change of a person. Remembering something they had not accessed in a long time because it was kept somewhere the daily requirements of their life did not reach. A library, she said. He waited. Not to own one, just a room, with floor-to-ceiling shelves and a window seat and enough time to read without anything requiring my attention. She looked slightly embarrassed by it, the way people do when something simple and genuine emerges from behind the larger things. That's what I wanted when I was 12. It doesn't seem anything, he said. She looked at him. It's a good thing to want, he said. The silence that followed was not empty. 3 weeks later, the Blackwood organization did not look the way it had. The Eastern Corridor had been restructured, not dissolved, restructured, with terms that reflected the new architecture of alliances rather than the old one built on fear and Sebastian's invisible management. 4 regional arrangements had been renegotiated. 2 had ended entirely, by mutual agreement and without conflict, which was itself something Damien had not previously understood was an option. The Ashford Consortium had emerged from its period of shadow operation. Not fully public, the nature of what it was and what it did not translate into press releases or public profiles. But within the specific world that mattered, it was no longer invisible. It was present. It had a name that people in rooms said out loud rather than worked around. Evelyn had given 2 formal meetings to family heads who had spent years half aware of the consortium's existence and fully uncertain of its disposition toward them. Both meetings had been productive. Both had resulted in arrangements built on information rather than leverage, the consortium's preference, and Damien was discovering a more durable foundation than he had ever given it credit for. Damien attended both meetings, not as Evelyn's representative, not as an adjunct to her authority, as himself. As a man who had something to offer that was different from what she offered and that worked in the room alongside what she offered without displacing it. The second meeting, on a Tuesday afternoon in the city, ended with an older woman named Petra Halloran, no relation to Sebastian's shell company, the name was coincidence, who ran the most significant intelligence brokerage on the eastern seaboard, looking at the 2 of them across a conference table and saying, I've been doing this for 31 years. I've seen a lot of arrangements. She paused. Most of them are either power or pretension. This is neither. What is it? Evelyn asked. Petra Halloran smiled. It was the smile of a woman who has lived long enough to recognize something rare when she sees it. Functional, she said, which is rarer than you think. The federal case against Sebastian Crow was filed formally on a Wednesday morning, 41 days after the summit. The filing was 47 pages. The charges were specific, documented, and the result of 6 years of work by investigators who had, for the last 6 years, been watching their work disappear and were now watching it resurface in a form more complete than anything they had assembled themselves. Sebastian's lawyers filed a response the same afternoon. It did not change anything, but Damien had not expected it to. He had learned, or relearned, the lesson that the outcome of a properly set process is determined by the quality of the preparation, not by the drama of individual moments within it. Sebastian had spent 30 years being the person who controlled the preparation. He was not, any longer, that person. The night the filing was made public, Damien drove to the north part of the city, alone, which still felt strange, the residual caution of a man who had moved with security for 15 years, to a neighborhood he had not visited since he was a teenager. The streets were different, the buildings were different. Most of what he was looking for no longer existed in the form he remembered it, but the alley was still there, narrower than he remembered, or perhaps he was larger. The delivery company whose trucks used to park there had been replaced by a restaurant supply business. The rusted loading door was new, not rusted anymore, not even the same door. But the alley was the same geometry, the same relationship to the street, the same shadow pattern from the buildings on either side. He stood in it for a while, thought about a boy who had been running from people who wanted him dead for knowing things he didn't understand, thought about a girl hiding in a truck, thought about the arithmetic of that moment, the calculation that had not been a calculation, the decision that had not felt like a decision, just the only thing a human being could do when they saw another human being in trouble. He had never thought of it as significant, had filed it, imprecisely, in the category of things that happened when you were young and afraid and moving fast, and then had not thought about it again for 30 years. She had thought about it every day. He understood that now. Not as a debt she carried, not as an obligation, as a fact about her, as one of the organizing facts of who she was. The girl who got out of the truck had grown into the woman who got back in every room, every arrangement, every 7-year silence, and asked the same question. Is he still moving in the right direction? He had not always been, but he was trying now. He drove back through the night city to the estate where lights were on in the second-floor study, which meant she was still working. She always worked late. It was one of the things he was cataloging, the inventory of a person he was learning for the first time. He went inside, went upstairs. She was at the work table with 3 documents spread around her and a cup of tea that had gone cold. The screens on the wall were running, but she wasn't watching them. She was reading something on paper, a printed document she'd annotated in her precise, unornamented handwriting. She looked up when he came in. "How was it?" she said. She knew where he'd been. He had told her this morning. "Small," he said. "The alley. Smaller than I remembered." She looked at him. "Are you all right?" she said. "Yes." He moved to the chair across from her, sat. "I just needed to see it." He looked at his hands. "She was so small. You were so small. And you looked at me like I was the person who was going to fix it, like it was a certainty." He looked up. "I had no idea what I was doing. I was 15 and terrified and had approximately no plan." "You had enough plan," she said. "Barely. Enough is enough." She set the document down, folded her hands. "I didn't look at you like you were going to fix it. I looked at you because you were the only person who stopped." She paused. "That was enough. That was everything." He was quiet for a moment. Then he reached into his jacket pocket. He had carried it since the morning after the divorce. The wedding guest book, small and cream-colored, slightly worn at the corners from weeks of handling. He set it on the work table between them. She looked at it. "I read it," he said. "The inscription, the night of, before I understood what it meant." He left his hand on the cover. "I want to understand what it means now. If that's still—" He stopped, tried again. "If that's still an offer." She looked at the guest book, looked at him, reached into the pocket of her jacket, a different jacket from the night of the divorce, but the same pocket, or she had moved it, or she had carried it the way he had carried the guest book, and placed it on the table. The wedding ring. Gold, plain, unremarkable from the outside. She turned it so the inside faced him. The inscription caught the light. Only the man who loves the woman before her power deserves to stand beside her. He read it. Read it again. His chest did something complicated that he did not try to manage or contain, because containment was the reflex of a man who had been taught that feeling things was the same as being owned by them, and he was done with that lesson. "Can I see it?" he said. She slid it across the table. He picked it up, felt the weight of it, heavier than he expected, or perhaps he was noticing the weight for the first time. Turned it in his fingers. "You kept it," he said. "I keep most things," she said. "It's a flaw." "It's not a flaw." She was looking at him with the particular steadiness she had, the attention of someone who has learned to look at things as they actually are, rather than as she wishes them to be, and who looks at him now and sees, as best he can tell, something she is willing to continue. "I'm going to take longer than you'd like," he said, "to learn things I should already know. I'm going to get things wrong in specific ways that are predictable from my history and that I won't see coming." He looked at the ring. "I want to try anyway. Not because I deserve another chance, because I don't want to spend the rest of my life being the man who didn't try." She was quiet for a long moment. Outside the window, the estate's grounds were dark, and the sky above them was doing what the sky had been doing for the last several weeks, moving, shifting, undecided about itself, neither fully resolved nor fully uncertain. "There's something you should know," she said. He waited. "I made the inscription before we were married," she said, "before I knew you well enough to be certain about you." She met his eyes. "It's not a verdict. It was always a direction." She paused. "The question is whether you're still moving in it." He set the ring down between them. "Ask me in 10 years, he said. She looked at it. Then she did something he had not seen her do in 7 years of marriage and 7 weeks of everything that came after. Something small and genuine and entirely unperformed. She laughed. Not loudly, not dramatically. The quiet, real laughter of a person caught off guard by something that is actually funny, in the way that things are actually funny when they arrive at the exact right moment with the exact right weight. He listened to it, held it in his chest like something valuable. She picked up the ring, held it for a moment, then she placed it in his open palm, closed his fingers around it. 10 years, she said. I can work with that. The work table between them held its documents and its cold tea and its annotated pages, and the screens on the wall continued their quiet work. And outside the window, the sky had resolved itself at last into the particular dark that comes just before the light starts to change. And Damian Blackwood sat across from Evelyn Ashford in a room that smelled like paper and cold tea and the tail end of a very long night, and held in his closed fist the weight of something that had been waiting, with extraordinary patience, for exactly this moment. Neither of them moved. Neither needed to. The story had arrived, at considerable cost and from considerable distance, at the only place it had ever been trying to go. Not a triumph, not a resolution that erased what it had taken to reach it, but this. 2 people in a lit room, at the end of a long night, with the whole of the next 10 years ahead of them, and no illusions about the difficulty of that, and the particular quality of silence that belongs only to people who have stopped performing for each other and are, for the first time, simply present. Outside, somewhere in the dark grounds, a bird called once, then quiet. Then the first, faint, unhurried suggestion of light at the eastern edge of the sky.